What's up, everybody? This is Logan Hanks with the Living Fully Loaded podcast. I've got third time's charm, I believe.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to be here. This is awesome.
I'm honored to have you here. This is, when we did the Christmas episode,
Yeah.
you mentioned, you said, we should do an Easter one. And then I said,
I know.
and I like it.
And you gave me 2 days notice.
I know that might have been a day more than last time.
It probably was.
Yeah.
I think it was.
I try to let you get really good and prepared.
Yeah. You just wanted me to, just kind of run on adrenaline here.
Yep. Yeah. I did. I said, I'm going to put him on the spot.
Absolutely.
But for those who don't know, Brother Peter Jeffrey, appreciate you. This is my preacher and my friend, and I'm glad to have you on.
Absolutely. And I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, for everybody, this is Easter's coming up this weekend, so we thought it'd be a cool story to kind of dissect the Easter story and kind of. I liked how when we did the Christmas one, we really thought about it from a very real perspective. Yeah. Like, these are real people we're talking about. These are actual events that happened.
That's exactly right. And, it's so interesting because when I thought about this just a couple of days ago, the name of your podcast, Living Fully Loaded, there was not a more fully living loaded person than Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no. It's been funny because some people shy away, and people can probably hear, they might can catch one of my chickens out there. It's funny people try to shy away from religion sometimes because Living Fully Loaded is not it's not a religious podcast.
Right.
It's just a total podcast, I guess, in a sense, but I've never shied away from it. And I think it's good because we reach a pretty diverse crowd.
Exactly.
And so I'm really excited. And yeah, like I said, Jesus. And I've got a question here that we'll get to, just like we did last time. We got some at the end. And mentioning Jesus and kind of living fully loaded and how he ties in with that. I've got a question kind of for the end.
Good.
So that'll be a good one.
Well, and, Jesus, a lot of people will ask the question, why did Jesus have to come anyway? Why did God have to come down as a person and everything else like that? And he says two things that are direct answers to that question. Why did I come? Well, in 1 John it says Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil. And that's the primary reason. Yeah. Because the world, when Adam and Eve sinned and evil entered the world, that now was the reigning power. They gave the dominion that God gave them to the devil. And so when Jesus came, his sole purpose was to destroy the works of the devil. He had to die and rise again to do that. So that's what Easter is really all about. Yeah. But then he said, I've come to give you life more abundantly. I've come to give you the freedom to live fully loaded. Yeah. Really, is what he said.
That's true. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was an example of that.
And it, which we'll get into in the story too, but it's kind of interesting to read the part, where Jesus actually is like, if there's any way I don't have to do this, because there's a thing I believe people have. I mean, Jesus, obviously he was, the Trinity, he's God, all of that. But at the end of the day, he knew still he was walking into what a terrible way to die.
Absolutely.
Like I told Marcy the other day, I'm going to watch The Passion of the Christ this week. I was going in and, that movie, I really appreciate that film because it's one thing to read something and read it. Yeah. But it's another thing to visually watch it. And I feel like that's got to be about the most accurate portrayal.
It is stunningly accurate. And you can't watch that crucifixion scene and not just get chills and kind of sick to your stomach. Yeah. And I know that, you can sit and pick apart that movie all day long. You can start to nitpick on details, but I think it is just as far as capturing the whole vibe, immersing yourself in the experience. It is an excellent watch, but it's difficult.
Oh, it is. I think Marcy and I think she said she's watched it one time and she's like, I just can't watch it again. And I want to watch it every now and then to kind of put it back into perspective. Absolutely. And there's, I've kind of joked to you sometimes about some of the Christian films. They can be kind of cheesy.
You're right. You're right.
Now, the other one, did you ever watch Risen?
No, I never did.
That one's pretty good.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. It's actually from the perspective of like one of the Roman soldiers,
Oh,
and
wow.
he's trying to find the body of Jesus.
Yeah.
Because they go to the tomb and the body's gone, and then at the end he ends up. I think he supposedly encounters Jesus.
Oh, wow.
After he's dead, and so it was good. I don't remember if it was technically. I think it actually was made by like a firm film, so it was a Christian one.
Okay.
I will say that is one of the strengths with Passion of the Christ is it was like, it was Hollywood big budget.
Full blown.
I mean, yeah.
Yep, I agree.
Jim Caviezel still took a Ninetales to the ribs. He got hit. So
I know. And he only took one.
Yeah. That's why I encourage people, because it does. I think it puts it into perspective. And like you said, I mean, I think because Mel Gibson's Catholic, I think there was some Catholic stuff in there, but for trying to grasp the gravity of what happens, I feel like it does a good job.
Absolutely, and honestly, kudos to him for doing that, knowing that he would take a lot of criticism for it. And
do you think they could do it today? Do you think they could make one like that today?
It'd be tough.
Yeah,
it'd be really tough.
I think he'd have a lot of opposition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, all of the special interest groups would want to be represented.
Yeah, and I don't know how you tie that in there.
I'm just not sure. I'm not sure.
Oh, man, yeah, that's the day we live in.
Yes, it is.
Well, awesome. Well, man, I think that's a good way let's dive into the story.
Okay, yeah, and really to kind of set the scene here, if we want to, just kind of get real, it way early on in the story, Jesus is with his 12. His rider dies, and he says to them, "Okay, it's time to go to Jerusalem," and they're going like, "No, it is not. It's never time to go to Jerusalem," because the last time he was in Jerusalem, they tried to kill him.
Yeah,
and so even Thomas says, "Oh, so I guess we're just going to go to Jerusalem and die with you then." And
the doubter,
exactly.
Yeah,
he's and so, but it says. In Luke, I think it is, that Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem. And in fact, we did a whole sermon series one year about the long walk home, the events of Jesus on his way to Jerusalem. And there's some very significant things that happen. But when it says he sets his face, he is bound and determined, nobody or nothing is going to stop him.
Yeah.
And so the disciples are just kind of going, okay, I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Let me jump in already.
Yeah.
Where do you think how did he know when it was time?
I'm not really sure. He says over and over, I only do what the Father tells me to do.
Yeah.
And so you can get into a lot of, kind of theological situations there because, a lot of people say, well, how can Jesus be fully man and fully God?
Yeah.
But it says he lowered himself. And so, while the connection with God the Father, he's still part of the Trinity, he takes on some human limitations.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So he's not like, soothsaying or anything else like that. He's just hearing directly from the Father.
Yeah.
Just like we're supposed to do all the time.
So, probably through prayer, essentially.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing,
You see him praying all the time, long prayers by himself. He's talking to the Father. And, even when, that scene when he's 12 years old in the temple and his mom and dad leave him behind and he says, I got to be about my Father's work.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of connection deal there. So he just knew it was time because he heard it was time.
Yeah.
And everything that had to take place before he gave up his life had taken place.
Gotcha.
With the exception of this last week. And the amazing thing is that everything is so perfectly orchestrated. There's like not one detail out of place, and certain things you see as you read the narrative. And the most complete narrative, I think, is in Matthew. All four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, have the account of the crucifixion and the resurrection, but they each tell it from a different perspective. Matthew's a little bit more, I guess, detail oriented, chronological. Luke goes more into the personal side of things, talking with some of the characters and some of the people that were involved.
Now, isn't that even kind of backwards a lot of times? Isn't Luke usually kind of the more detailed, because he was he not a doctor?
Yes, he was a doctor.
Okay.
He was also a Gentile.
Yeah. All right, go Gentiles.
Yes, exactly. We love Gentiles. But So the perspective of Luke is he wants to affirm, he's writing to a Gentile audience to affirm that they are who Jesus said they are, that they're part of the family.
Okay. Yeah.
That they're Christians, that they're Jesus followers, that, God is available to everyone.
You don't have to be a Jew.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. Matthew is specifically writing to Jews. And he is basically saying, here is how every event in Jesus' life matches with the Old Testament prophecies. That's why he starts with the genealogy, just everything.
Gotcha.
He wants to make sure that Jews know that Jesus is the Son of God, that he did die for the sins of the world, and there is going to be a New Testament.
Yeah.
It's not all going to be the law and the prophets.
Yeah. Now, isn't there a thing today, not to like get lost off on this, but do the Jews today, what is it? There's something that they don't think he came, or isn't there something?
No, they acknowledge that he came. They just don't believe he was the Messiah.
Gotcha. So who's the Messiah in there?
They're still waiting. How
did it get to that point from what Matthew's saying?
Well, you just either believe or you don't.
Yeah.
And it says many of the Jews believed, which means most of them did not. And as we'll see in this little scenario here, the last week before the crucifixion, Jesus' mission was to expose the religious institution.
Yeah.
And the reason is, a lot of these discourses, he speaks them to the religious leaders who had gotten so far off the rails.
Yeah, they're sad, you see.
They are. They're sad. my dad used to always say that. The Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection. That's why they were so sad, you see. Because when they die, it's over. Yeah. Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes. Those are the people that he's indicting through this whole thing, because they have intentionally led the people astray.
Which is, all that actually kind of leads me. I had this conversation the other day with somebody that we're really not experiencing anything new.
No.
Because, still today we feel like our leaders are lying to us.
Absolutely.
And then you go all the way back to here. Those were the leaders.
Yes.
And they're lying to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't sound too odd when we think about, celebrity religious leaders who are preying on the people's devotion to line their pockets and to build their wealth.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's going on today. And the thing that I preached about this a couple of days ago, the 8 woes that were delivered to the Pharisees. This is the harshest words that Jesus ever spoke.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is he spoke them to the religious leaders in front of the multitudes. So he wanted the multitudes, the average Joe like you and me.
Yeah.
He wanted us to hear him say that to them. And that's why I believe it relates to the religious world today.
Yeah.
And not every church, but it's the churches that in the celebrity pastors and all the religious machine that is hurting people.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are walking away.
Yeah, as I say, it's put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. I mean,
completely.
I had a conversation with a guy that is, I don't know if he's an atheist or an agnostic, but he said he watches Joel Osteen every Sunday.
Wow.
He said, man, he's a great motivational speaker.
He is.
And I said, well, first he was like, I enjoy watching him preach. And I said, well, he's not a preacher.
Yeah, not really.
He's a motivational speaker.
For sure.
The woes, was it Matthew 23?
23.
All right, real quick, a question on that. Why is verse 14 not in there?
Well, that's an interesting thing. It's just not in some of the earliest manuscripts that they have found. So we go back, and in the New Testament manuscripts, the oldest ones that we have are between 100 and 125 years after the events happened.
Yeah.
So we don't have any originals, which is not a problem because we don't have originals of any ancient writings.
Yep.
So, you take the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, which everybody feels like is completely accurate. And that actually was the copies we have of that are like 400 years after.
So yeah, a good bit further then. Yeah.
So this is closer than any other ancient writing we have. But in some of the early manuscripts they found, verse 14 was not there. And I'm not exactly sure why. It could be a lot of different things. It could be that, the people who were copying these, and they copied them all by hand, obviously, and it was in some of them and it wasn't in others, or they found another version of it and had that verse in it, and they go, oh, we need to include that. So they, that kind of thing. So in my mind, I don't really have big problems with it because it's in there somewhere. It just, but they want to be so careful, and they want everybody who's reading this to know that in some of the early manuscripts, that verse just wasn't in there.
Yeah.
But I read, when I was putting these woes together with the Beatitudes, I read an article by a very renowned scholar, and he was asking the same questions. Like, well, if we're going to take the woes against the Beatitudes, the blesseds, how do we deal with verse 14? And so he matched them all up, and he said, you know what? They matched so perfectly that verse 14 has to be in there.
Yeah.
And it's true. They do.
It was funny, because when you were preaching Sunday, I was looking in my Bible, and it went 13 and 15.
Yep.
Like, it actually, they didn't just skip it like in mine. I mean, you would think they'd have just like, well, we'll label 15, 14 because it comes after 13.
I know.
But instead, they just straight up skipped it. And Marcy looked at me, and she was like, is 14 in yours? And I said, no. And so then Samantha and Austin were next to us, and I was like, hey, do you get 14 in yours? And she looked, because we both had, I think, ESVs.
Yeah.
Samantha had an NIV. It wasn't in hers. And so then I even pulled my phone up, and I pulled up American Standard, and 14 was, there was 13, and there was 3 little dots. And I could click them, and it would pull up 14.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's pretty fascinating. So
it is. And that some of the translations just leave those out. For instance, in John 7, I think it is, the story about the woman caught in adultery.
Yeah.
That is not in some of the early manuscripts either. So they usually bracket that out. But the interesting thing is a lot of the translators will leave that in because it's such an important story. But then they'll leave out like a verse 14 or something like that. So it's like, come on, guys, at least be consistent.
Yeah.
But I have the New American Standard, which is my favorite translation.
Okay. Is it in there, I guess, then?
It is. It's in brackets. And it says, this verse not found in some of the earliest manuscripts.
Gotcha.
So that's why that's the way it is. And I know that some just leave it out. But I put it in. I think it belongs.
Yeah. I mean, it was a fitting verse when I read it. I'm
Absolutely.
like, I don't know why this, there was nothing in there that I was like, this shouldn't be in here.
No. And it is so consistent with the other things that Jesus has to say to the Pharisees and the Sadducees that it's like, there's no reason to leave it out. Really.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Well, man, let's get into the story.
Okay.
Then.
So Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem. He makes his way down, has several miraculous encounters, heals a blind person, woman at the well, all that kind of stuff happens. And so they get to this little town, and they stay the night. And the next day, Jesus gets up and he says, "I need you guys to go find me a donkey." And that account is not in Matthew; it's in Luke and John. And it's funny because right before this, like the day before, they're just getting into Bethany, I think it is, or Bethpage, one or the other. And James and John have this argument. And they have their mom come and ask Jesus, when you set up your kingdom, can our sons sit on, or can my son sit on your right and left? Which, if a king sets up a kingdom, his most important people are the ones on his right and left. They rule with them.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, first of all, you don't even know what you're asking. Second of all, why are you asking me? Because I'm not the one setting up the kingdom. It's the Father. And then he kind of smooths that over. The other disciples are kind of upset that they would have the guts to do that. And I read this commentary, and so Jesus gets up and he says he sends 2 of his disciples to go get a donkey. And their speculation is that it was James and John.
I was going to say, it's got to be them.
It's got to be, yeah.
This is right and left-hand man.
I know. You want to be right and left? Go get me a donkey.
Yeah.
You get to do donkey duty.
And I can't, I'm still picturing their mom. Because how old were the disciples probably at this time?
They were probably early 20s.
Yeah. But I mean, they were grown men.
Yeah. Oh, they could speak for themselves.
Yeah. Especially at that era. I'm sure that they were.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a lot of them, yeah.
I mean, here's an interesting thing too, is there was something about Jesus that made it okay for a woman to come and ask him that question, because women were not to speak to any man that way.
Yeah.
Even their husbands, but Jesus was so accessible to women, and was so, women felt valued in his sort of his entourage. And so it does say something that she would feel okay about doing that. But
Yeah.
obviously she asked the wrong question.
Yeah.
and James, I don't know if they put her up to it or if she just did it on her own, but
That's pretty good. I never knew that.
yeah. And so anyway, they go and he gives them instructions and he says, if anybody asks you why you're untying this donkey, then tell them the Lord has need of it. And that was a pretty common idea in their time, that a king could just, order his own transportation. Go get me a horse, go get me a chariot, whatever. And they would just say the king needs it. And that's the interesting thing about that statement there. It says the Lord needs it. Jesus never calls himself Lord. The people sometimes do.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it's almost as if he's speaking of his Father. It's almost like God needs this to happen.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not all that excited about it, but the Father
big
wants
man
this.
says, yeah,
exactly. So they do, and somebody asks them, and they say the Lord has need of it, and they say, okay, go ahead. and so they get the donkey, and they put Jesus up on it, and he just begins to ride.
Which I feel like that's a big deal.
It is.
Just to get somebody's donkey.
It is.
Because that was probably, you think back in this day and age, that's their workhorse. Yeah. That's probably their transportation in a lot of ways. Like, that's a big thing they just got from somebody.
Yeah.
I don't guess I've never thought about how they acquired the donkey. I was like, I just probably figured, I don't even know I've never thought on the donkey much, but like thinking about it now, it's like, that's asking a lot. And then the people are just like, oh, okay.
I know.
Yeah.
And Jesus tells them specifically where to go to get it. You go into town, first house on the right, you're going to be a donkey there, go get it. And so it's all, like I say, perfectly orchestrated.
Yeah.
And so they set him on this donkey, he starts to ride. Now, the interesting thing is this is Passover week. And so there's multitudes of people on their way into town. But they say specifically that this particular multitude were seeking out Jesus because they heard about him raising Lazarus from the dead. So that was like the big thing that happened on his way down to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And so when John tells it, he says that basically they're coming just to see this guy that supposedly raised somebody from the dead.
Yeah.
And so that was the reason why they were there. So they see him and he's riding on a donkey, and they get this idea that he's on his way down to, kick some Roman tail and become the king.
Yeah.
And they get just totally stoked about it.
Yeah.
And they're going, this is really happening.
So that's why the people are like cheering him on and stuff.
Yep. And that's why on Palm Sunday, we do this big celebration and everything, but sometimes we don't remember that I described it as hollow praise.
Yeah.
That they were praising him for who they thought he would be.
Gotcha.
Their idea of him, rather than for what he was actually going to do. By the time he gets to the cross, they have no idea why. And the disciples don't even have any idea why.
Yeah.
And so that was how limited their understanding was. But there's so much symbolism in that donkey. And it says that he rode on the donkey specifically to fulfill a prophecy in Zechariah. Lo, your king comes riding on a donkey, the colt of a donkey, that kind of thing. And that the donkey symbolizes peace. If a king is coming into a town to make war or to dominate, then he rides a horse, possibly rides in a chariot behind a horse. But if he comes on a donkey, then you can see him from a far off, and okay, everybody stand down.
Yeah.
He's coming in peace.
It's not like a big powerful
exactly.
thing he's riding in on.
So even though he's got a multitude around him, it's not an army. It's he's coming in peace. And that's why I think Jesus he's not super happy about this. He never smiles, laughs, waves, takes it all in. He's just keeps his eyes straight forward. At one point, Luke says he stops and he looks at the city and he weeps over it.
Yeah.
And he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I wanted to gather your children and put them under my wings as a hen does her chicks, but you wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
And he says, now this whole thing is going to be laid waste. Temple, city, everything, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. You don't really know why I'm really here.
Yeah.
And so that's that day. And
and on the donkey here, you made me think of something else. Is it I guess in Revelation. So
Yeah.
when they come, it's interesting now thinking, I didn't know the peace thing. So donkeys on peace, I guess it's in Revelation where it says he's coming down on like chariots of fire, basically. So, I mean, and at that point, it's coming to wage war, I guess, with Satan or whatever.
To destroy the works of the devil. That's exactly right.
So that's pretty... So he ain't riding a donkey out of heaven at that point.
Nope. And it even says he's got a tattoo on his thigh.
Really?
Yep.
All right. I didn't know.
So there you go.
Yeah.
His name is written on his thigh.
Okay. I didn't know he was tatted up.
Absolutely.
Dang.
I'm telling you, living fully loaded.
Yep, he is.
Right there. Guns a-blazing, man.
Yeah, a sword comes out his mouth.
Yep.
Blood covered clothes.
He's got it all.
How come there's never any paintings of that? You know, everybody wants to see the, like,
I know.
They talk about, and it's well, I'll save that for the end here because that's part of one of my questions.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get off.
It's a good topic too.
Yeah.
But yeah, we like the Western European Jesus with blonde hair and blue eyes.
Fabio.
Carrying the lamb on his shoulders. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I've seen the paintings. I know.
Yep.
All right. So then he gets into town. And this is the most amazing thing. The first thing he does is he goes right to the temple. Now, this should tell us something also about the Christian world that we live, the corporatized Christian world we live in, that the first thing he does is go to cleanse the temple. And there's a few layers to this as well. But basically, this whole week, everything he does is perfectly calculated to prepare the world for his resurrection, which ushers in then, the coming of the Holy Spirit. Then we have this thing we called Christianity, followers of Jesus. It's called the Way at the time. And so he has to, go step by step. And the first place he goes is the temple. And it's not a surprise to him that there are money changers in the outer court. He knows this, but it's time to get them out. Yeah. And what they were doing was not illegal or immoral or necessarily bad. It's where they were doing it, because they had gates set up for livestock to be brought in. And if you just walked 90 miles to go to Jerusalem for the Passover feast,
you didn't probably have your
lamb. You're not, and how are you going to keep that lamb just pristine and spotless and everything? Yeah. And so they had the sheep gate. So if you needed a sheep, you go there and you pay your money and you get a sheep. And interesting side note, rabbit trail, the shepherds who were watching their flocks by night, remember that they were, by all accounts, shepherds that were raising these sheep that were sacrificial lambs. Yeah. So the location is
I'm
right.
I'm assuming they probably had to be like pretty well taken care of. Yeah. I would think, like you said, pretty pristine animals for that.
And here's the interesting thing. Part of their process was when the lamb was born, at a certain point, they would swaddle the lamb to keep it perfect. Yeah. So there you go. It all fits. Yep. Anyway, so they could have been set up anywhere except for the outer court of the temple, but they got the most foot traffic that way. It was just good business. Yeah. And so what they were doing was not necessarily bad, but the way the temple was situated had the inner court, which was where the Holy of Holies was, where just one priest per year could go in. And they had to tie a rope to his foot in case he had some sin left that he didn't confess, because he would die and they'd have to pull him out.
Because nobody could go in there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So inner court, and then they had the men's court, where men who had gone through the ritual cleansing would go in, and that's where the temple worship and the sacrifices and the altar and the horns of the altar and the blood and all that stuff would happen. Then they had the women's court, which was for women and men, but that's as far in as the women could go, and that's where they gave their offerings and all that stuff. But then there was the outer court. The outer court to Jesus was actually the most important, because that's where anybody who wasn't allowed to go inside could be around the outside, and they hear what's going on inside. They could absorb a lot of it. They could,
so the average people kind of thing.
Yeah, probably. Especially Gentiles. Yeah. Gentiles, of course, were not allowed in the temple, but they could come to the outer court and they could soak up the religion, the worship. Yeah. And so anybody who was seeking, like even Gentiles could convert. And then they had to be circumcised, and they had to go through all this stuff, but then they could become Jews. Now they were Jews. But so anybody who was curious could be in the outer court. And Jesus is going, you just don't care about anybody but yourself. Yeah. And so he drives them out. And he drives them out forcefully. He says he went to his shop and made a whip. And it's hard for me to imagine Jesus, you see, how many nails am I going to put in this strop? You know,
Yeah.
it's like, wow. Okay.
I didn't know that he made the whip.
He made it.
That's pretty good.
I know.
But I mean, he was a carpenter.
He knew how to do it.
Yeah.
He absolutely knew how to do it.
Did he have a shop already? Like, did he know when he got there, there's a shop down here on the right? We're going to swing in.
Probably. But it's funny. He said to his disciples, go get me a donkey, but he didn't say, go get me a whip.
Yeah.
He did that himself.
Yeah, I got the whip. I'll take care of that one.
That's exactly right. And then he immediately begins to interact with these religious leaders. And there's a little odd kind of scenario here where it says, in the morning when he came into the city, he got hungry and he saw a fig tree, and he saw leaves on the fig tree, didn't see any fruit, and so he curses the fig tree. And when they walked back by it later on in the day, the fig tree was withered.
Killed the fig tree.
Yeah, if you aren't bearing fruit, you're done. It's like he's got this whole different mentality.
Yeah,
you know?
he's like on a war path at this point.
But it symbolizes people who should know better.
Yeah.
That you know, they have the law, they have the prophets, they have the wisdom writings. All of the prophecies are there, and they had been conveniently leaving out anything that didn't match up with who they thought the Messiah should be and what the Messiah should do.
Yeah.
They had one thing in mind, and that was to get us out of the Roman rule, and not only get us out, but to rule over them. And that is so, I guess, such a telling picture of the world that we live in. Because right now, you know, we've got all this deconstructing going on. We're trying to, you know, find our true selves. And, you know, and we're all convinced that we are being oppressed. Everybody's convinced that we're being oppressed. And so if we can just figure out who's oppressing us, and we can throw off that oppression, then we will be free to be our true selves. But the problem is, we never want to just be free. We want to then become the oppressor.
Yeah. That's
the goal.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's going on here. And that's exactly what Jesus sees. And that's what he's indicting, because he's like, no, this will never be true freedom, because you're going to overthrow the Romans. You're going to rule over the Romans. And then you're going to rule happily and freely until the next strong power comes along, and then you'll be oppressed again.
Yep.
You've got to be able to be free no matter who's ruling over you. That's his whole deal.
Yeah.
And that's why he says things like, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free, and, you know, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So they challenge his authority. And I love this. I love this little scenario, because this is Jesus' humor coming into play. And he is like bitingly sarcastic. They say he was teaching and doing miracles, and they say, we want to know, by what authority are you doing this? You know, they want to know, who's your authority figure? Yeah. What power are you using to do this? And he says, I'll ask you one thing too, which if you tell me, I will also tell you. He says, the baptism of John was from what source? From heaven or from men? And they're immediately like, oh, we can't say from heaven, because then he'll say, then why don't you believe me?
Yeah.
But we can't say from men, because the people are convinced that he is somebody special and somebody, you know, otherworldly. And so they're like caught in the middle. And so they say, we don't know. And he says, then I won't tell you. Just like that.
Yeah. So Jesus, see, it's impossible to stump this guy.
Impossible. And here's the better one. He says, they go through this whole, before that, he tells a couple of parables. They're very famous parables. He tells the parable of the two sons, where the landowner asks his two sons to go accomplish this task.
Yeah.
And the first one says, yes, I'll do it right away. And he never does it. And the second one says, no, I'm not going to do it. And then he ends up feeling guilty and goes and does it. He says, which one actually did it? And of course they say the second one, you know. Then he tells a parable of the landowner who owned a vineyard that he was renting out. And the people that he was renting it out to, it was time for them to give him his cut. So he sends a servant, and they beat him up and throw him out. They do that 3 times. Finally, he says, I'm going to send my son. They'll respect him. And they kill the son.
Yeah.
And so he says, what's the father going to do? He's going to sweep down on those people, and he's going to kill them, and he's going to, you know, drive them out, and he's going to take back what's his and give it to somebody else. He's talking about, and they knew it. He's talking about the Jews were the ones who were kicking out and killing the Son.
Gotcha.
And he says, I'm going to give it to somebody else, which is the Gentiles.
Yeah.
That was blasphemy. And they were not happy.
So they picked up on what he was saying there.
It said in verse 45, it says, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was speaking about them. But when they sought to seize him, they feared the multitudes because they thought he was a prophet. So then he tells the parable of the marriage feast, which, basically the guy's having a big wedding feast and he invites all these people and everybody gives an excuse why they can't come. So he sends his servants out and says, go out to the highways and the hedges and get whoever's going to come. So it gets to that. Then they asked him, is it lawful to pay the poll tax to Caesar? And he says, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's. And they're going like, oh, okay. And the funny thing is, these questions were being asked by people who were hired by the Pharisees to go and stump him. And every time that he answers like this, they go, oh, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
They're like blown away.
Yeah.
And so then they get into this thing about what are the greatest commandments. And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And one of the lawyers gets up and says, well, who's my neighbor? And in Luke or John, I can't remember which, it tells the story of the Good Samaritan. So we go through all that. But the funny thing is, Jesus says, okay, now I've got a question for you. He says, this Messiah that you're waiting for, the Christ, whose son is he? They said, well, he's the son of David. And so he quotes scripture and he says, then how does David in the spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies beneath thy feet? If David calls him Lord, how is he his son?
Yeah.
And I love this verse. And no one was able to answer him a word, nor did anyone dare from that day on to ask him another question.
So he silenced them.
Yeah. It's like mind blown. I'm done. I'm not going to ask anything else.
But at none of that point, none of the Pharisees are ever fazed to think maybe he really is the Messiah.
They would not let themselves go there. That's the whole thing. And this is what Jesus indicts them for. You may remember Nicodemus. Nicodemus comes to him by night.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want anybody to see him talking to Jesus. He becomes a believer. And he becomes a believer by his encounter with Jesus.
Yeah.
Joseph of Arimathea, whose tomb Jesus was buried in, was also a Pharisee, and he became a believer as well.
Gotcha.
And both of them said they were secret believers. So if there was two, there were more.
Yeah.
There were some of the Pharisees and scribes that got it. None of the Sadducees ever got it. He basically pronounced them dead.
Yeah.
Their hearts are hardened. They're never going to get it.
Do you think, well, I guess I'm on the Pharisee side that did believe in secret. Well, I mean, I was going to say, do you think that they were judged any harder because of that? Or, I mean, I guess if their hearts were there, but I didn't know. I wonder how that went down in the end. The fact that they believed but would not stand up for their beliefs.
Well, I honestly think that I think Jesus had great compassion on them, and I think we could really,
because of the position they were in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I was listening to one of my podcasts the other night, and there's this guy from London who has a big ministry there. I was talking about the band U2.
Yeah.
And he's known them. This podcast was done when the band turned 40. So it was a few years ago. But he was talking about knowing who they were and meeting them when they were nobody up in Ireland somewhere. And he knew that they were all believers, he knew their pastor, what church they went to. And they didn't enter the Christian music industry because they didn't even know about it. And so they just started playing and just started doing all the same venues all the rest of the bands did. And then they broke out and they became really famous. But there's a lot of Christian content in their music.
Yeah.
And so he says, they never really talk about it. They don't preach about it. They don't, even their charitable causes are not, uniquely Christian, but if you spend any time with them, what they believe. And I think the same thing applies here, that they were, the practices that the Pharisees did on a daily basis were not evil. In fact, Jesus at one point says, hey, y'all, do what these Pharisees do. They study the scriptures every day. They are devout. They keep the laws. You should be doing that stuff. What he's indicting him for here is what they're doing extracurricular.
Gotcha.
What they're doing on the side. They're on one hand doing the right things, but they're doing so many more wrong things that they've completely led the people astray. And they're not, when they're teaching and they're preaching, they're not teaching and preaching the whole truth.
Yeah.
Because if they were, then everybody would recognize Jesus when he came.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, like I said, it's kind of like what we said at the beginning of this episode. This podcast as a whole is not
exactly
set up as a Christian podcast, but you listen to it. Now we got a wasp joining us here.
Yeah.
He wants to hear the message.
Woe to you, wasp.
But yeah, well, that is, I guess, I don't know that I had ever put a whole lot of thought into the Pharisees, the fact that some of them, I mean, I knew of Nicodemus. I think that's the one my kids sing the song about Nicodemus all the time. And, but I don't guess I had really put a whole lot of thought on the fact that he was a Pharisee. You just it's kind of a broad thing that the Pharisees were kind of the bad guys.
I know.
So in that,
but God put them in place. That's what I spoke about on Sundays, that this was a system that was very godly in its inception and had become corrupted. And that's why it parallels so well with the modern church today, because the church obviously was powerfully and beautifully begun, and was specifically so that anybody who believed could be saved, and anybody could have a new life and be complete and be fulfilled, and through leadership. And I know that God just judges leadership. He says if anyone does anything to hinder one of these little ones, it'd be better that he wasn't even born. That a millstone be hung around his neck and he'd be cast into the sea. There's a lot more harsh criticism for leaders and how many, just pick up any kind of, look at any news feed these days, and you'll find leader after leader that is abusing their position and abusing the thing that God gave them.
Let's go down that when we get done with the story here.
Okay. Good enough. So anyway, so they get to that point, and Jesus gets up and gives his last public address. And the part that I didn't have time to include was the part that comes before the woes. It's so interesting what he says to the multitude about the Pharisees. He says, they've seated themselves in the chair of Moses, which was a big deal. That was stinging criticism. He says, all that they tell you, do and observe, but do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. He says, they tie up heavy loads, lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. But they do all their deeds to be noticed by men. They broaden their phylacteries. That means they, adorn themselves extra, like $3,000 sneakers. Have you ever seen that Instagram site, Preachers and Sneakers?
I have seen that, yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of that.
Yeah, do you get you some $3,000 pair of sneakers?
I got some $30 sneakers. I hadn't got quite to that level yet.
I'm I'll tell you, I'm a pretty old school still. Like I've always, and it's not a harsh criticism, I guess, on my part, but I've always thought it was odd whenever I call them like the hipster preachers.
Yes.
I've always thought that was just, I don't know, that's something I can't quite get behind.
I can't either. There's something about it. I don't know. It's just like you're trying a little too hard to be cool.
It is.
I just, I will never get there.
Yeah, well, I won't see you in some, I don't even know what they're called because I'm out of the loop on.
Well, I think I'm sneakers. Way past the point of man bun at this point. I just, we just won't even go there. Anyway. But he says they love the place of honor at banquets, chief seats in the synagogues, respectful greetings. He says, and whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. And then he goes into these woes, and it's hard for us to imagine the words that Jesus is using when he says woe, because it actually is a curse. He's cursing them. So I don't know if he's like swearing at them or if he's just formally, prophetically pronouncing a curse on them.
Yeah. What would this be comparable to so people can kind of grasp. I mean, is this because he's essentially challenging? Is this like, I know there's the king, but the Pharisees are very high leadership in the
They
community.
are the leadership, yeah, because they weren't allowed to even have a king at that point. So the Pharisees basically answered to a Roman governor.
Okay, yeah.
And so they were allowed to do what they wanted to do pretty autonomously, but they had to give a report to the governor, like, monthly or something like that. And the governor would be the one. Pontius Pilate was one of those who.
So it would be, I mean, he was, as what happens in the story, he was challenging people that could put him to death. I mean,
absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the commentators that I read, when he talked about the cleansing of the temple, it's like Jesus intentionally did this violently so that they would have a reason to arrest him.
Really?
Yeah. To force the issue.
Yeah.
And so when he pronounces the woe, that would be very similar to us telling somebody to go to hell.
Yeah.
And mean it. Not just figuratively.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
he was saying it with purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was pronouncing that curse on them. And so he goes through these 8 woes, and then he says the line, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. And he says, I'll say to you from now on, you shall not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then, so he spends a little more time with his disciples over the next couple of days. He doesn't speak in public again, doesn't do any more miracles. He speaks some of the most famous parables, the parable of the talents. He talks all about his second coming. And then he gives this long discourse about the judgment, about the sheep and the goats, and how, he's going to say to the sheep, welcome in, my good and faithful servant.
Where can people start reading? Matthew, what is where they can begin the Easter story? And kind of,
if you want to go, well, honestly, the best place to start is at Matthew 21, which is the triumphal entry, which is Palm Sunday. If you want to kind of go before that to get some of the backstory when Jesus starts to go to Jerusalem, you can do that. It's fascinating. If you just really want to immerse yourself in the Easter happening, chapter 21 is the place to go.
Okay.
And so by the time he gets to the judgment, describing the judgment, this is the end of chapter 25. And then starts the whole slow burn to the cross. In 26, it says this is the plot to kill Jesus. So Judas, one of his own disciples, who was a zealot, and that's kind of an amazing thing about how Jesus chooses his disciples. He's got a couple of fishermen. He's got a tax collector who was considered the lowest of the low sinners out of anybody. He's got a zealot. And Judas is not even from Jerusalem. He's from a neighboring region. And it turns out that his father was a zealot as well. And
what is a zealot?
Okay, a zealot is somebody, they're actually Jews, but they would lead a rebellion. Most famous is the Maccabees. In fact, there's a apocryphal book of the Bible. The Catholics have it in their Bible called First and Second Maccabees, I think it is. And the Maccabean rebellion actually almost succeeded. But when it didn't, they had like thousands of crosses all over the region with these Maccabees
really
hanging
Dang.
on them. Yeah, it was a bad day.
Yeah.
But so Judas's father was part of one of these, actually led one of these rebellions. And so he had it in his blood.
To lead a rebellion against Jesus, basically?
Or against Rome.
Yeah.
And the reason that he followed Jesus was he thought that's exactly what Jesus was going to do.
So he was about like the hollow praisers when they go in. They think like,
that's
here
right.
he is coming to.
That's
gotcha.
right. And John exposes Judas. He says that Judas kept the treasury bag and used to take money from it. And so he was never really honest to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, he gets together with the priests and says, what will you give me to turn Jesus over to you? And that's like, how could you, after walking with Jesus for three and a half years, seeing all the compassion and love that he had, and raising a widow's son from the dead, and just all these amazing, compassionate things, and the reason is because, and picture yourself, okay, so. You're born into slavery. You've got these oppressive Romans who basically could just take you out at any moment, or belittle you, or make you do things you don't want to do, and it's just the way you live. And so you hook up with this guy who can raise people from the dead and who can control the weather and can heal people and cast out demons.
Pretty bad dude. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anytime he wants.
Yeah.
And so you're going along with all this fuzzy, compassionate stuff, thinking, okay, he says he's the Messiah. He's going to be the king. So, at some point, he's going to finish with all this stuff, and he's flip the switch, and he's going to overthrow, and nobody's going to be able to stop him.
Yeah.
I mean, he could slay the whole Roman army with just a wave of his finger. I mean, he just knows that.
Yeah.
But by this time, it's like, okay, this money changer thing, and now you're getting in trouble with the Pharisees. It doesn't appear to me like you're going to do anything to the Romans. In fact, you're just ignoring the Romans.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've had enough. I just have had enough. And so now it's like, I got to get Jesus out of the way so we can, because Jesus had already given them the power to cast out demons and heal people and do all this stuff. It's like, so maybe we got enough power. Yeah, exactly. And so he goes to the priest and he starts, concocting this betrayal.
What'd they say it was, like 46 cents equivalent for today?
Yeah. Just a few bucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really wasn't that much. He asked for a lot more than that, but they're only willing to give him 30 pieces of silver. And he does it anyway.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with the money. But here's the interesting thing. He's concocting this plan. And in the meantime, Jesus is preparing for the Passover meal. And he gets them together in this upper room, and they get together for this Passover meal. But there's no lamb there. Typically, lamb is featured at a Passover meal.
Yeah.
And instead, Jesus kind of flips the script around, and he holds up the bread, and he said, I know that typically I would say that this bread represents, freedom from slavery in Egypt, and we're going to remember that. But I want you to remember it differently. This is my body. It's going to be broken for you. And then, so every time you eat bread, remember, this is my body. And then he does the same thing with the cup of wine, which was a symbol of their redemption.
Yeah.
And he says, now this is not symbol from freedom from Egypt. This is freedom from sin. This is my blood that's going to be shed for you. He's trying to lay it out for them just as plainly as he can. And but the interesting thing is, he serves Judas, and he says, "I'm offering you redemption." And he knows all about it. And at one point, John is sitting closest to him, and John whispers in Jesus' ear, which one is going to betray you? And he says, "It's the one that that's gonna dip the bread with me in this bowl." And so John kind of passes it around to the other disciples, and so Judas dips it with him in the bowl. And then shortly after that, he leaves.
So John knew?
John knew. Mm-hmm. He asked Jesus, and Jesus told him privately.
Yeah. And then who is it? Well, I guess it's later when Jesus makes the remark, like he's betrayed by the kiss or whatever.
Yeah.
Because Judas, I guess, kisses him on the cheek there. At the, I had read something, and it was talking about Judas and Jesus, and it was an interesting kind of relation to this whole thing that, if somebody like wrongs us, it's so hard for us to forgive them.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, Jesus actually, like he washed the feet of Judas.
He absolutely did.
I mean, and he knew this dude is, he's for like a few silver pieces, he has literally sold me.
And he serves him anyway.
Yeah.
And he loves him anyway. It's absolutely amazing. And so they go up, they finish the Lord's Supper, and then it says they sang a hymn and they went up to the Mount of Olives, because at that point Jesus was speaking and ministering and getting in arguments in Jerusalem during the day, teaching in the temple, all that, and then he would go up to the Mount of Olives to sleep. But he would do more teaching on the Mount of Olives as well.
Yeah.
So they went back to the Mount of Olives, and then all of a sudden he says, it's time. It's time for all this to go down. And the disciples said, for what to go down? He says, well, I'm going to be arrested. And Peter says, no, I'm not going to let that happen. Even though anybody else falls away, I'm not going to fall away. And Jesus said, I'm just telling you that before it's morning, before the rooster crows, which is kind of just a term that he was using, he said, you're going to deny me 3 times. Three is a significant number. That's the complete, you're going to fully deny me.
Yeah.
Like all the way. But here's the other thing. Everybody gives Peter such a bad rap for making this statement, but it says all the disciples said the same thing too. It's like, where did you get the idea that Peter was the only
one? Yeah.
It says, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. All the disciples said the same thing too.
Yeah, Peter. Why does Peter always get the bad?
I know.
Because he's always the one that gets pointed out.
He's the loudmouth.
Yeah, he's the one that chops the dude's ear off and everything else.
And that's the funny thing too is, it's like, what is a fisherman doing with a sword? Here comes Judas. Here comes the big crowd of priests and officials that are arresting him, and Peter gets out this sword. It's like, and then it says he cuts his ear off. He was trying to cut his head off.
Yeah, I have actually thought about that. I would like to see how you cut a man's ear off with a sword, because like that's a really odd, like, I don't even know how you just chop his ear. Like, how did they not hit him anywhere else? Like, I've thought about that. I'm like, how do you just cut someone's ear off?
Yeah, because you're really bad with a sword.
Yeah, because you're a fisherman with a sword.
Exactly. He's trying to, he's aiming for the neck and he hits him up here on the skull somewhere. I know. It's just crazy. But Jesus, when he says it's time, he goes into the garden to pray. And he asks Peter, James, and John to come with him. And he says, I just need you to sit with me. And they all fall asleep multiple times.
Yeah, they fail him time and time again.
Yeah, you'd think they'd be there laying hands on him. It's like we're having a prayer meeting. It's like, but they still just don't really understand. They don't know what's going on. And we kind of get on them for not knowing. But like, we have the scripture. They didn't. They were living it.
Yeah, we'd be the same way.
Completely, we would. We might even do worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think about this stuff and how I hate confrontation, and I hate getting into arguments and stuff. I might have just said, Jesus, you're the Son of God. You go do your thing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be down here somewhere.
Yeah.
And so he says, "Arise, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand." And that's a dramatic moment. And so here comes the big entourage. They arrest him, and then he appears before Caiaphas, the high priest. Caiaphas is a mean dude. There is nothing good about Caiaphas, and you see that in this whole mock trial. The interesting thing about the trial is they were never allowed to try somebody at night. This is how bad Jesus was railroaded, but they did everything at night because they were afraid of the people.
Gotcha. Okay.
If they did it during the daylight, then somebody was going to come to his defense.
Yeah.
So they did everything illegal. They arrested him at night. They took him immediately into the courtroom at the temple headquarters, and they tried him. And they accused him. They brought in false witnesses. They accused him of all manner of things. He never defended himself. And so at some point, Jesus says, he says, tell us whether or not you are the Christ, the Son of God. And he said, you've said it yourself. He said, hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And he tore his robes, and somebody hit him. And they kept saying, hey, you're a prophet. Tell us who hit you. And they kept hitting him. And so they're already hitting him. And then in the meantime, Peter's sitting across the courtyard watching this. And that's when he denies Christ. He's asked three times.
They're essentially mocking him when they're saying these things like, "Oh, but you're the prophet."
Exactly.
Yeah, they and these are the religious leaders.
Absolutely. These are the pastors, man. You know, it's crazy. And so Peter's sitting there watching the whole thing. And by the way, this will show up later, but it says specifically that he's sitting at a charcoal fire. Very interesting. Because after the resurrection, Jesus appears to the disciples, and they don't recognize him because he's on the shore and they're out in the boat. He tells them, hey, let out the net on the other side. You'll catch a lot of fish. And they do, just like when he very first met them.
Yeah.
He's kind of bringing things full circle. Peter realizes it's Jesus. He jumps out of the boat and he wades to shore. And Jesus is sitting there having already cooked some fish. Where he got the fish, I have no idea, because Jesus was not a fisherman.
Yeah.
But he's got fish cooking, and it says specifically on a charcoal fire.
Huh.
It's the only two places that charcoal fire is ever mentioned.
Mentioned?
Yeah. And so Peter gets to see and smell and remember, like, yeah, that was when I denied Jesus.
Oh man, yeah. So it brings him back pretty hard then.
And he knows that Jesus knows.
Yeah.
Because at the time, Jesus was getting whooped. And Peter is thinking maybe he didn't know.
Yeah.
But now he knows that he knows. So it's quite dramatic. But anyway, so they accuse him of blasphemy, and that gives them the grounds to take him before the Roman government. And by now it's daytime, and so they can do anything they want. They're in the Roman court now. And this is when we see Pilate come on the scene. And the whole story of Pilate, you could just go on for a couple of hours about Pilate. Pilate is kind of a hot mess, and he's full of himself. And his wife tries to tell him, hey, there's something special about this guy. You better be careful. And he says, no, it's okay. So in the end, he says, I don't find any fault in this man at all.
Yeah.
And so he offers them up, one day a year they can, around Passover, they can ask to have a prisoner released. And so he says, well, do you want this guy or do you want this bad dude Barabbas released?
Yeah.
Trying to think, okay.
Surely they're going to pick this guy.
Yeah, they won't want Barabbas, And they say crucify him. The very people who were praising him, the crowd, the multitude. And that was the way that the Pharisees manipulated them so badly. Because they're going, don't you see, this guy's a blasphemer? We've been telling you this all along.
Yeah.
And so now they're yelling to have him crucified. And so they give him the whole treatment, the whole Roman treatment. And when they ordered a crucifixion, it was for some sort of rebellious act against the Roman government, and they always needed to make an example. That's why they invented crucifixion in the first place. It was open, it was public. They stripped you naked. They beat you every way they could beat you and took great pleasure in it. And then they would pound the nails into your hands and a big spike through your feet, and they would drop that thing in the hole. And they made it just so you could barely breathe. You'd have to lift your torso up to get a breath. And sometimes it would take, 12, 13 hours before you finally died.
Yeah, that'd be terrible.
Yeah. Jesus died in 6 hours, which was amazing. In fact, Pilate sent somebody to make sure that he was actually dead. They told him he was dead. That's why they ran the spear through his side and, that kind of thing. Most of the time, when they got tired of it, they would go and break their legs, because then they couldn't hold themselves up anymore and they would suffocate. Yeah. And so they didn't break his legs, which was also the fulfillment of another prophecy in Psalms. David wrote it. He said that not a bone of his will be broken. And and then the interesting thing about that was he died at exactly the right time, because the next day would have been the Sabbath. They couldn't do any work on the Sabbath, so they couldn't get his body off the cross on the Sabbath. They would have had to let it set until the next day. Huh. So he died exactly the right time. Joseph of Arimathea goes to Pilate and says, can I have the body? Normally that wasn't done. Normally they would get the body off the cross, throw it in a ditch, and just let it rot so that everybody could see. But he says, are you sure he's dead? And it's like, yeah. And so he said, yeah, you can have the body. And so he gives up his tomb. Nicodemus, the other secret disciple, brought 1,000 pounds of myrrh, which was opulent. That was like way more than they would ever typically. Yeah. And you remember the three wise men, gold, frankincense, myrrh. Yep. They're bringing myrrh to the baby, very interesting there. So they put him in there and they sealed the tomb.
Now that was crudely so that it would mask the smell, I'm assuming.
Yeah, partly for that, but they were going to take extra care, because they'd been hearing this stuff about the Messiah rising again, about Jesus rising again. So it's like, no, we'll make sure this is not going to happen. Yeah. And so, yes, it was partly to disguise the smell, but it was also, especially for that first day or two, they posted a battalion around, which was, I don't remember how many, but it was more than 100 Roman soldiers.
Oh, no, I mean the myrrh. Oh, isn't the myrrh? Oh, yeah, that's what it's for. Yeah, it's for the scent.
Yeah, the myrrh, and they initially put myrrh in there, and then they would come back a few days later and add all of these aromatic spices.
Gotcha.
And so that they would.
But they sealed it because of this. They probably, I'm sure the Roman government or whatever was assuming somebody was just going to steal the body and then be like, "That's it. He's rose."
Yeah. That's it. And so that's exactly what the priests told the Roman soldiers to say.
Yeah.
After the fact, when they couldn't find the body, they said, "Well, just tell them that somebody got in and stole it," which they did, but they couldn't have told that to forcefully because it made them look bad.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, there's a whole 100 Roman soldiers, and we all went to sleep, and somebody snuck in and rolled that big old stone away, and it was, they took every precaution. And of course, as the scripture account reads, that the angels came and rolled away the stone. They struck down the Roman soldiers, and they lay there as if dead. And we know that the Holy Spirit was the third person of the Trinity, was what raised Jesus' body from the grave. And it's very interesting because, and one year I did a couple of sermons on this. It's like you asked the question, what did Jesus do for those 3 days? And it's a little bit of speculation because the scripture is not super specific, but it does give us some breadcrumbs along the way.
Yeah.
Basically, it says that he went to Hades, and Hades is a term. It doesn't mean hell. It means the place of the dead. And so you imagine before there was any redemption that nobody could be completely delivered from their sin.
Yeah.
So they had basically a holding tank for their spirits, and it was a place of the dead.
All of them, like anybody. I got you.
All of them.
Okay. And
the way it's described in Scripture is that having 3 chambers, one for the unrighteous, one for the righteous, and one for the demons. So apparently, when Jesus cast out a demon, that's where it would go.
Gotcha.
And so Jesus took dominion back. He says he took back the keys. And he took the righteous and he led them to be with the Father. So he basically takes them to heaven. But on the way, he says, hang on, I got to stop and do something real quick. And he appears to Mary. And the interesting thing is that you have this weird scenario because it says that many of the old prophets and saints appeared alive in Jerusalem. And so it's like, you guys just go hang out. I got to go here with,
grab you a coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go visit your old neighborhood. Whatever you need to do. And so I don't know what to make of all that. I don't know if all that is very literal or if it's very figurative. It doesn't make a difference either way. The important thing to know is that there was something very, very supernatural going on at the time.
Yeah.
Even when Jesus died, it says the sky went dark. Everybody knew. I mean, it was like
something just happened. Yeah.
And there was a great earthquake. And even there's an account of one of the Roman soldiers that was guarding the area around the cross said, surely this has got to be the Son of God. So even he knew at that moment. So supernatural activity through this whole thing.
What a terrifying moment for the guys that were part of killing him.
Oh, man.
Could you imagine? Because, a lot of them, again, we have the scripture.
Right.
So from our side, it's like, what a bunch of idiots.
I know.
You just killed the Messiah.
I know.
But, if you put yourself in the shoes of these soldiers, in their mind, they're just following orders. And this is just another guy that's just, committed blasphemy, doing this, whatever. He's leading uprising, whatever they want to call it.
Yeah.
They think they're doing the right thing. And then they kill this guy. And then all of a sudden this stuff happens and it's like, holy smokes, this dude really is what he said he is.
Well, and think about if you were one of his disciples who just turned tail and ran.
Yeah, and said, I don't know him 3 times.
Uh-huh. And then all of a sudden the sky goes dark and earthquakes.
Yeah.
Like, oh crap. And so the interesting thing is when Jesus dies, the only people that are actually supporting him and around him are women. His mother's there. The other Mary is there. John is the only one who is nearby.
Gotcha.
Because Jesus looks at his mother and he says, he looks at John and he says, behold your son, behold your mother. And so he connects them and makes sure his mother has
somebody
support.
to take care of her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, it happens that, he just disappears from the tomb magically. He reappears to Mary. He is in some sort of different kind of body. We speculate that it's a glorified body. and she doesn't recognize him. And so then he speaks her name. She recognizes him. And then she and a couple of the other women go back and tell the disciples. They do not believe them because traditionally in their culture, you didn't believe anything women said. They were not trustworthy.
Yeah.
Women and shepherds were not allowed to testify in court.
Interesting.
I know.
Women and shepherds.
Yep.
Man, we've come a long way.
Yes, we have. We at least let the shepherds testify, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So they did not have the Me Too movement back then.
No, it was.
Stomp that thing real quick. There you go.
Got him.
No more wasp to worry about in here.
He's in wasp Hades.
Yeah, he's waiting.
Yeah. So then Peter and John come running back, and they go inside the tomb, and they see Jesus' grave clothes with no body in it, and they see the headpiece wrapped up and placed in a different place. And this is very much speculation, but it's a good story. It's said in their culture that if you were all finished, then you would lay your napkin on your plate. But if you were coming back for more, then you would fold it up and you would put it aside, away from the plate.
So it's like he set it there for them, knowing
everybody know I'm coming back. Yeah. And so from that point on, he appears to. He's always had like supernatural powers, abilities. But now he can walk through walls and appear and disappear just any old way he wants to.
Yeah.
He appears to two people that are walking on the road to Emmaus, which they're walking back to their house. They don't recognize him. He tells them all about the scriptures, eats with them, and he breaks the bread, and all of a sudden they recognize him, and they're amazed, and he disappears. He appears to his disciples in the upper room. Thomas is not there. We don't know why. Maybe he just ran down to the store to get Coke or something. But he doesn't believe. And then Jesus appears, behind it. He comes through a locked door, and he says, "Come here, Thomas. Put your hands in my hands, and feel my wounds and everything." And he's immediately, it's real. And then it says he appears to many people over the next 40 days, as many as 400 or 500 people.
So that's how long he did for 40 days?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then he ascended. He gave the Great Commission, go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then he rose up into heaven. And basically when he said, the angels say, I can't remember who says it, but it's like he's going to come back the same way he went. Yeah. That's the idea.
Now, during that time span, he only appears to the disciples at one time, I guess when he comes back. Or does he ever see them again in that
no,
40?
He sees them several times.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they actually spend time with him, and he appears in larger gatherings and smaller. It says that he appears multiple times to many people. And the interesting thing is, I know this is one of the hardest things for anybody to wrap their mind around. If you have a very analytical mind, you're going to have a hard time with this one.
Yeah.
Because people don't come back from the dead. And it's easy to sort of explain things away. Well, there's the swoon theory that Jesus wasn't really all the way dead. Kind of like Princess Bride, just mostly dead.
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah. And so he got up and healed and everything else like that, which is not really possible. First of all, he was confirmed to be dead more than once. And second of all, if he did get up, how would he get out of the tomb and get past all the Roman guards?
Wouldn't he be bleeding pretty bad? The fact that he had been wounded in the side?
He was so wounded.
Yeah. He
was actually unrecognizable. They had beat him so bad. Yeah. And so that theory does not hold water. And then of course there's the stole the body theory, which I just have no idea how that would be physically possible with the Roman guard and all the precautions they took. Yeah. So then some people say, well, he didn't really rise from the dead. Then that was something else, or it was a story they made up because they just really needed to prove that they were right. Honestly, they didn't believe that he rose from the dead.
Yeah. Even they doubted.
Yeah, it was just over. And so they weren't prepared to keep this religion thing going. They just ready to forget about him.
What were the disciples? Were they just going to, at that point, had Jesus not come back from the dead, were they just going to go back home and take back up fishermen, whatever?
That's exactly what it says. It's, they're all sitting around one day, and they're in fear for their lives.
Yeah,
because now they're marked men. So they're sitting in this locked room, and Peter says, "I don't know what you guys are going to do. I'm going to go fishing." And the other guys say, "You know what? That actually sounds like a good idea."
Yeah,
you're just going to go fishing, and that's when Jesus appears to him on the shore. It's the first time they really see him alive. And it absolutely blows their minds. And he set it up so perfectly because, when he called Peter, James, John, they were fishing, and he said, "Hey, caught anything?" "No." "Well, why don't you try letting your net out on the other side?" And they're going like, "Okay, you not fisherman person, why are you giving me advice?"
Yeah.
And they go, "Well, okay, we'll try it." And they had so much fish they almost sunk their boats. So this same thing happens again. He recreates the miracle.
Yeah.
He says, "Hey, did you try the other side?" And they go, "No, but since you say so, we will." And they did. And then all of a sudden it's just like, okay.
Yeah.
And then Jesus uses that scenario to restore Peter back to fellowship. And that's one of my favorite stories in the Bible because there's so much emotion and there's so much, Jesus is so.
What, he has him come out on the water?
No, when he gets to shore, the other guys pull the boats in, and Peter's standing there with Jesus at this charcoal fire.
Yeah.
And so they sit down to eat breakfast. And it must have been a really awkward breakfast for Peter because it's kind of like when you do something bad and your mom says, "Wait till your father gets home."
Yeah.
And so you're sitting at the dinner table hoping that he forgot.
Yeah.
But he never forgets.
Yeah.
And so he says your name, and then you know what's happening. And so he said, "Peter, come here." And he said, "Do you love me?" And he uses the word agape. So were you really serious about what you said back then? Do you really love me? And Peter realizes that there is not, agape is like all-consuming love, self-sacrificial love. Peter realizes that he cannot claim ever again that he agapes Jesus because he doesn't even know what that means anymore.
Yeah.
So he says, "Now I phileo you," which is brotherly love, but it also is an obedient love. I'll go to the ends of the earth for you. I'll do whatever you want me to do.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says again, "Do you agape me?" And he says, "I phileo you." And then Jesus says, "Do you phileo me? Will you obey me?" And Peter says, you know I will. And he says, "Then feed my sheep." And he's restored. But the hardest thing that Jesus says when they're sitting at breakfast and they all get up and he takes them aside, he says, "Simon, come here." Simon was his old name.
Yeah.
Before he renamed him Peter. And Peter, of course, means rock, like big rock. And you remember, when Jesus says, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I'm going to build my church." This is like Peter's elevated status.
Yeah.
And now he's all the way back down.
Back down to Simon. Yeah.
Simon. And then, of course, he's restored to fellowship and becomes one of the most prominent disciples. But that's the whole thing about this whole resurrection thing and the whole Christianity thing. Christianity is the most widespread religion on the planet. We've not handled that very well at times, but it is that you cannot deny that there are more Christians than any other religion on the planet. And for them to not have experienced a resurrected Jesus, there was no reason for them to propagate this nonsense.
Yeah.
They all got killed for their faith in brutal ways.
Yeah, was it Peter that was crucified upside down?
By request.
Because he didn't want to be he didn't deserve to be the same way.
That's exactly right. He was crucified upside down. Even the Apostle Paul was martyred for his faith. There's no reason for these people to propagate something that was just not true.
Yeah.
Even James, Jesus' half brother, was very critical. He was not part of the disciple troop. He didn't want any part of it. He was critical of Jesus. He is like, I grew up with this dude, and frankly, he's pretty arrogant, about all the things he knows and all the things he can do and everything. Was not really a believer. But when he saw Jesus alive, it completely changed.
Yeah.
He actually begins to call him my Lord. It's like, your big brother, you're going to call him my Lord? And then he writes a book of the Bible. It's just like dramatic change.
Yeah, that you could not explain otherwise.
No.
Yeah.
No, there would be no reason to do that. And so to say this is all, a mythical figure, a fake story, why do so many people die for it?
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's, I think of all, it's hard for me to pick between the Christmas story.
I know.
Or the Easter story. I mean, the Easter story obviously is brutal. I mean, it's a brutal story. It is. But the redemptive thing, that's like something that I feel like, I don't know if it gets people kind of miss out on with the church today, a lot of them, but it is that redemptiveness to it. And, everybody, or not everybody, but it's oftentimes people talk about, well, it's a bunch of hypocrites, church.
I know.
And, but you don't, there was an old saying or quote about it, and it was like, you don't go to the doctor when you're well.
That's exactly right.
You go to church to get healed. You go there and so it's the whole story of the Easter story kind of all ties, like even with Peter.
Yeah.
He denies Christ, and then he even is, like I said, reverted back to Simon, but then he's like, so he's redeemed in the end. So there's always that redemptive ability in there. And I think a lot of people, I feel like that gets glossed over pretty good.
Very much so. And Christianity has done this to itself because, up until, at one point, Constantine becomes the emperor of Rome, and he converts to Christianity.
Yeah.
And then he makes that the official religion of the Roman Empire. And it's like it's been going downhill ever since because it's not subversive anymore.
It's forced.
And now we can build. And it says that his wife was the original church planter. She would go around and fund these enormous buildings, which, it's all done with good intent. But man, we see shiny things. We want to take credit for it ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've been taking credit for ourselves ever since. And so and I don't mean to be totally cynical or critical of the church. The true church is still everything that it was cracked up to be.
Yeah.
Because when you find a true body of Jesus followers, your life will be changed. It absolutely will. It doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter how many bad things you've done, because it's not as much about what you believe. Some people think, well, you've got to believe the right way. You've got to believe the right things, and then you'll be right. You think about this. The disciples scattered out from there after they saw Jesus alive. They had one piece of scripture. He is risen. That's all they had to go on.
Yeah.
They had their experiences with Jesus and the fact that he's alive. And they saw that and they knew it. And now everything, fit into place. And then the Holy Spirit came on the day of Pentecost, and it gave the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead now dwells in you. Now you have power. Now you have a conviction. Now you have authority. And so now you got a message, and you got the power to deliver it.
Yeah. And
but that's the only message they had. Peter and John see this lame guy outside the temple, and he's begging, and he's begging for money, and they say, we don't have any money, but what we do have, we're going to give you. Get up and walk. They gave him power. They gave him redemption. And that's exactly what the church does today. It doesn't save you. It leads you to the one who will.
Yeah.
It doesn't redeem you. It leads you to the one who will. And I always love to say, my favorite line is, they say the church is full of hypocrites. And I say, no, we've got room for one more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's true, man. And I think it's kind of what we have talked about. One of the issues is people have a hard time trusting, I think, the church because of, what we've We've seen it. I feel like all the time. I think the media, they love to say
Yes.
when the next like religious leader
Oh, yeah.
has fallen
Absolutely.
from sexual allegation or something else.
Yep.
And what do you tell people that are like not sure if they can trust the church?
Well, I have great compassion for them. I have been hurt by the church. My dad was a pastor all of my life, and he was hurt tremendously by the church. My mom has been a pastor, and they just recently were hurt by the church. You know, the very thing. But that's the thing is, you can risk being hurt most by what you love the most.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when you put humans in the equation, then it's going to get misused, and there's going to be church hurt, and it breaks my heart because there are so many good churches, and there are so many good, loving, caring people, Christians, who just want to point you to Jesus and point you to that fully abundant life. You know, it's kind of like, I think to myself, how much money would somebody pay to actually have peace in their soul, to know that your marriage has a fighting chance, to know that your kids will more than likely be productive human beings? How much would you pay for any amount of assurance that those things could happen? Well, rich people would pay a lot.
Yeah.
But, it doesn't cost you anything, yet it costs you everything.
Yeah.
As you surrender control of your own life and give it to Jesus, it's like you're instantly flooded with new life. And that's why he died like he died and rose like he rose, because it's symbolic of what happens in our lives when we die to ourselves and we rise again in new life with a glorified spirit that can weather storms and that can make it through tough times and deal with difficult people. So what I say to them is, first, you got to heal. Don't just go running back in there, because everything's going to trigger you. If somebody said a terrible thing to you, or if somebody betrayed you, or God help us, if somebody abused you, you got to heal. And so you just need to find yourself a couple of, a few close friends who are, who will not, basically bash the church while you're there, but who will help you,
Yeah.
And then don't abandon God. Just, get some good, positive God kind of stuff to just help you stay strong. And then at the right time, just like when Peter was restored to fellowship, God will lead you to another body of people who will treat you like God meant for you to be treated. It's terribly heartbreaking. And I think for those people that belong to Mars Hill that, just disintegrated overnight, there's just trauma, widespread. And the people that are in all the Hillsong churches right now, they're confused. It's like the worst case scenario. But true Jesus followers don't betray you. They point you to the one who will love you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, man. Well, I think that's good on that. I've got a few little questions here.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you think we need to add on the story?
No, there's so much more we could say about it. I mean, we've skimmed the surface and we've done a pretty good job of it, but so much more in there. If you read the story in all four of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, you get a super clear picture of, because one will highlight one detail more than another. And you just get this robust picture of what happened. And it's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to be cynical. But if you just let it kind of soak in and just imagine, just ask yourself the question, what if it really is true?
Yeah. I like it, man. All right, on that.
Yeah.
We talked about trusting the church and working on that.
Yes.
Okay, so a debate I had recently kind of goes in with this. I don't remember, the hard part I have found when I debate like a non-believer is my resources come from the Bible.
Right.
And they're always like, they don't believe the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like, okay, well, when if I quote a source to them that they don't believe, and all the time it comes up, well, that book was written by men. Now, I've always said, when that comes up, I always say, but it was God breathed the word through the men.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you, I feel like we've talked about it a lot, but like the fact that it's written by men, what is your response to that?
Well, there are a lot of things that are written by men that we have no problem accepting.
Yeah.
Because they're not particularly challenging, because they might hit our mind, they might hit our emotions, but none of them really deal with our inner person. That in the inner person gives us the most grief, the most trouble.
Yeah.
How often do we wish we could feel peaceful right now, or we could feel calm? They've got apps that are, you can meditate and lower your blood pressure.
Yeah.
But we read ancient stories, and we read the works of Shakespeare, and we read works of famous philosophers, and it gives us a lot to think about and a lot to chew on, and we don't really question it. We think, well, of course that person wrote that, and of course it's brilliant, and makes me think, and that's exactly what's happening in all of Scripture, really. Yes, men did write them down, but especially in the case of the Gospels, they're eyewitnesses. They're writing down what they saw with their own eyes, what they experienced. In fact, in the Gospel of John, which is the best one to read first, because John is just so spirit oriented. But he says, I've all these other guys have written their stories about Jesus and what they witnessed. I waited and I wrote mine later. They wrote theirs to chronicle what Jesus did and the impact that he had. I'm writing so that you will know and have confidence that he is exactly who he says he was. And so he writes a lot of historical events, but he comes at it from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
He comes at them from how they're going to hit your spirit. And then when you look at the Gospels and what Jesus actually did, and then you go back to the Old Testament and the prophecies. Well, the prophecies are a lot like, in some ways, like philosophy. How do philosophers write what they write? They hear things, or they sense things, or they imagine things. Well, the prophets, basically they claim to actually hear God speak to them. Yeah. Well, how often have we heard that little small voice that says, "Don't eat the cake, eat the vegetables"? Yeah. Everybody's had that. Well, that's in a more profound way. That's what the prophets were doing. The Psalms were written by men, but they were written in praise to God. What happens when we have an incredible experience? We write about it, and we have all these wonderful, descriptive terms about it. So that part of it, how do you really believe that Nietzsche wrote what he wrote? I do. Yeah. I wasn't there. How do you know that George Washington was the first president? We just believe it with the
writing. Well, that's what, for me, it's always kind of I always kind of look at it as a grasping at straws kind of thing. Because if I've learned anything from the debates, it's typically, if I answer one thing, they just come back with another. Like, it's like, so, and that's where one of the debates, it had gotten pretty heated. And I had a good friend that actually, he was like, stop, just get out of this thing. Like, it was like, there was several of us, and he was like, just stop. You're not gaining any ground. And so that's where I'm like, at the end of the day, a lot of the times, one, I've had to recognize, are they actually wanting to have a conversation?
That's right.
Because most of the time they're not.
Yeah.
And then two, the thing that I come back to a lot, and I think it was Spurgeon that said, the word of God is like a lion, and it doesn't need me to defend it.
That's true.
Like, it's always kind of comical when I have somebody that's like, why are you getting upset? Like, we're not talking bad about you. And it's like, but you're talking bad about literally my entire belief system.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's an easy thing to get heated about.
It's personal.
It is. And so one of the other element to that, and this is one I think we might have talked about a little bit before, but I have morality. I've had multiple times where they're like, I don't need a book to tell me what's right and what's wrong. And I that one's interesting to me because it's like we've talked about before, even in a tribe that no one's ever reached, for the most part, I feel like they know, if a guy has a piece of bread, you don't go and steal the man's bread. Right. Like, so where does morality come from if it's not from our book we read?
Well, first of all, morality doesn't come from a book. Nobody needs a book to tell them right and wrong. It's built into us.
Yeah.
And, that's why, one of the, Paul, when he's writing, that the works of God are evident so that no one has an excuse. Everybody knows. And this is one of the primary arguments against, certain theories of evolution. The evolutionists would say that, well, that was an instinct that we developed to be able to live in tribes and not kill each other all the time. But if the primary goal of evolution is to survival of the fittest, then it doesn't make any sense to let weaker species have their way or take first place or to share with them or to not extinguish them because
you're hurting the tribe.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could make a super race, And that's what strict evolutionary science does. I mean, it wipes out anything that doesn't hold up. But yet morality says, no, you treat people well and you actually sacrifice for them. And where do we get the instinct to give up our lives for somebody, to jump on the train tracks to get somebody off? That doesn't make any sense from science for sure. And the other argument that I love is, well, but religion has killed millions of people in the name of God.
Yeah, I hear that. It's like, oh yeah, how many people did God have killed in the Old Testament?
Yeah. Well, the number one killer is science. Nuclear bombs. Hello. Plagues, machine guns. I mean, that's all science. Yeah. Science has killed more people. There have been more people killed in the 20th century than there were in all of the history that came before that.
Yeah.
When we're talking about actual conflicts.
Yeah.
And so, no, more people have been killed in the name of science than ever have been thought about killed in the name of religion or of God or of anything else. So that argument just doesn't hold any water.
Yeah, so I guess they would essentially say, well, then why do you believe science if science is this brutal killer?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that Bodhi Baucham, I like him a lot, and I've got one of his books on apologetics, and which I always think back. I recommend Bodhi stuff. I like him a lot, but he had some bad health issues here recently. But I go back to when I was in high school, my senior year. I think it was my junior or senior year. They offered Defending Your Faith.
Oh wow!
And I think I was required to take it because I had already met a lot of my stuff. Mm-hmm. Not because I was an excelling student, but just because I had met
you just been around long enough.
Yeah. And so the bad part is the only thing that I took away from that class. I mean, it was a good class, but I just wasn't. I didn't care about school, so I was just going through the motions. Right. Unfortunately, the part that I remember to this day, the only defense that I can recall is an ad hominem, where you basically just insult the other person.
That's exactly right.
Like I for some reason, the phrase, I still remember the phrase when you were arguing, it was like, it said, "You are a liberal pagan atheist who has no basis for morality." I was like, that's what I left from a whole year.
Love it. That's a good line, by the way.
Oh, it's very strong, man. It's strong purpose. I think I actually used it right after that class. I'm pretty sure I used it on a guy, and he was like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" Yeah. Like, all right, the last one here.
Yeah.
Because of the time we're in, on this podcast, I've had people on. We've talked about masculinity today, and I've had a person before that kind of argued. It was basically saying you don't see Jesus as this statute of masculinity. They were like, when masculinity is referred to, and they use ancient history or something. It's like the gladiator. It'll be the image of the gladiator, striking down somebody or something. It's like this strong warlord kind of figure. And they're like, you'll never see Jesus representing that portion because, and they were basically saying like, it's not the Christian church, Christianity is not really this masculine thing. And that's why I enjoyed our chat earlier about, the fact that it's interesting to think of him coming in on a donkey as peace. And then when he comes down and basically I was imagining in Tombstone, whenever Kurt Russell's brother, or Wyatt Earp's brother's been killed, and he says, you tell him I'm coming and hell's coming with me.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
What do you say to that when somebody says like Jesus isn't really the image of masculinity?
Man, I will say, first of all, I think Jesus is the perfect picture of true masculinity because Jesus had a tender heart toward everyone who was in need, everyone who needed help and protection and provision. And that to me is first off what a true man does. A true man protects and provides and has a tender spot for his children, for anyone, for an animal who is suffering, I mean, that to me, if you don't have that spot in you, you're not really masculine. You're not a real man.
Yeah.
And so, a real man knows how to heal wounds and knows how to speak encouragement and knows how to motivate and even a little tough love every now and then, which is what Jesus did to his disciples. I mean, come on, you're better than this. You can do better. Get thee behind me, Satan.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is Jesus saves his outward aggression for the people that deserve it. These Pharisees and scribes that are just totally unjust and corrupt, and he looks at all the mass of people, and you are doing them wrong. You are abusing them. You are devouring widows' houses, and you cover it up with long prayers. You're telling you got an inheritance that you're going to use to take care of your parents in their old age, and we're going to tell you that it's more holy to give it to the church, and you can keep it in a storehold until your parents die, and then you can withdraw it again, and then you can be rich. He unleashes on these people. It's interesting because when we think about these woes, we think that Jesus rightfully would have stood in the public square and says, "Woe to you, prostitutes! Woe to you, drunkards! Woe to you! You messed up. You need to repent." He's not. He has compassion on them. When the woman that was caught in adultery was brought before him. He had compassion on her, and he didn't, start a fist fight with the Pharisees. He just wrote down their own sins in there and says, "Okay, anybody want to cross that line?" To me, and Jesus, it says that he wasn't much to look at, that nobody would have considered him particularly good looking.
Yeah,
but he said he was a carpenter. Well, they didn't have much wood back then. The definition of carpenter in their day was woodworker / stonemason. So you think about big, hand-hewn cubes of rock and stone and everything. Jesus was definitely cut and in shape.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
working with stone and a hammer and everything else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when he made a whip, he knew how to use it. Yeah. And they knew he was coming for him. And he was an imposing figure.
Yeah.
He's certainly not a wimp. In fact, I think he's just absolutely the perfect picture of masculinity. And when I think of myself as a father, and I think of myself as a man walking and living and working around this world, I'm thinking, man, I want to be just like Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that all kind of ties back when he was coming in on the donkey and all these people were praising him. If he had looked like this sissy that wasn't going to overthrow, they probably would have been like, this dude's about to get smoked.
He had the whole entire package.
Yeah.
He had the stature and the build of, somebody that was an imposing figure, and he had this power to do anything he wanted to do. Yeah. That's why they wanted him so bad.
Yeah. Well, man, yeah. Well, I think that's I feel like we've gone down that one pretty good on this I feel like that was a good exploration of the Easter story.
I felt really good about it. Like I say, there's so much more we could say.
There is.
But I encourage anybody who's watching and listening to just read it with new, fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Read it with some of the insight that we've sort of tossed around here, and you'll get a different picture.
Well, and just like we did with the Christmas story, and I try to do with this one, and what I've tried to do when I read stories now, really because of that, is imagine myself in the position.
Exactly.
And like the fact that these are real stories, these really took place, these are actual people. And because, we have the hindsight already. We've got the stories. These people were in the moment when this stuff was going down. So it's really fascinating to me there. Where can, I know on YouTube, Holly Grove Church.
Yes.
And what's our website?
It's hollygrovechurch.com.
Okay. Well, there you go. Easy enough.
Yep. You can check us out. We've got some new Easter information about our services and everything going up soon, hopefully today. And then, you can catch us live on Facebook Live or YouTube, either one. And we're going to stream our service at 10 o'clock.
Cool.
And then if you want to get up early and come to the sunrise service, you can, 7:30.
There you go. Well, and it's, this will actually, for everybody listening, you're obviously listening. If you listen on Wednesday, we're here on Tuesday. You'll be able to catch this before Sunday. So this will be a good pregame before you get in there.
That's exactly right.
So you'd be tuned up. So I hope you guys will check it out. Thank you for joining me.
I appreciate you having me here. It's always fun to just tear this stuff apart and put it back together. And it's always fun I love your perspective on just life. And when you bring that into the discussion of Scripture, it just brings it a whole different picture.
Well, that's what I'm learning as we go, so I'm enjoying it.
Me too.
So, well, guys, thank y'all. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you watch this on YouTube, please hit the like button, hit subscribe, and if you enjoyed the message, share it because we're here at Easter, so no better time.
Absolutely.
Thank y'all.